So welcome to the Human-Wildlife Coexistence interview series, where we will be joined by members of our conservation programme teams. My name is Hannah Clare and I'm a conservation programme coordinator here at ZSL, and we'll be chairing these interviews. So today on our coexistence series, we're joined by Baghwan. Thank you very much for being a part of these talks. Could you just start off by please introducing yourself and telling us about the project you're working on?
Thank you. I'm Baghwan Dahal. I have been working for ZSL since 2015. Initially, I worked as an advisor for illegal wildlife in trade projects, and my role was to support the government of Nepal in scientific management of wildlife trophies. But since early 2016, I have been supporting the Nepal country team in implementing the number of conservation projects, including species conservation, human-wildlife conflict mitigations, and sustainable livelihoods. I am based in Kathmandu, but as a manager, I have been traveling around the project sites most of the year. Working for ZSL, you see, I'm dedicated to achieving its mission in wildlife conservation and averting the decline of wildlife population as well as species loss. Supporting community development activities and wildlife research are the key areas where we have been collaborating with the communities and other relevant stakeholders. So we work in all the tiger bearing protected areas and other important forests and landscapes that are crucial for the survival of many threatened wildlife species. So these conservation priorities of ZSLs are well in line with the Nepal government conservation priority. Therefore, our focus is mainly on the vital species, including Royal Bengal tiger, rhinoceros, and other age species. But in the tiger-bearing protected areas, again, we are basically, investing on tiger conservation activities. This is just my very short introductions.
That's great, thank you. So in terms of the human-wildlife coexistence series, are there any human-wildlife conflicts in this landscape that you're working in?
Yes, there are because we are working in the tiger-bearing protected areas and other forested landscapes. So these areas are rich in wildlife, and we all know that these protected areas are best known habitats for many wildlife species, including megafauna. And these protected areas and forest landscapes are especially distributed and are mainly surrounded by human settlements. That's why when you have tigers in your landscape, and the human-wildlife conflict is the most widespread near the protected areas where wildlife populations are highest. That's why we have a number of cases from our working landscape, this kind of conflict cases. Why the numbers are increasing? We have now 235 tigers across our lowland landscape. Mm-hmm. That is really a great achievement of the Nepal government. Yeah. You see, so these increased numbers, are now moving to other forested landscapes. So this increasing trend of population of these species across the protected areas and corridor forests has also increased the chances of encounter between people and wildlife in extended areas in new areas. Mm. So this is good, because our conservation efforts are becoming so effective. Yeah. That has resulted the increased number of tigers. But at the same time, we have to have other challenges coming up. So we have to be very much careful and very sensitive towards working in this landscape.
Yeah. And have your team worked with communities impacted by these conflicts to develop any kind of mitigation measures to promote coexistence?
Yes, the community participation is one of the key components of ZSLs. If we exclude the community, from the conservation component, then you cannot make it achieve. That's why we work with the communities. So, we think that coexistence is the only way forward, to ensure a prosperous future for both the wildlife and people, So we need wildlife in our conservation landscapes and also people to care for their survival. That's why we have introduced a number of schemes in mitigating conflicts and promoting coexistence. For example, fencing, fence the village. So we found that the fencing has been very effective in mitigating, the conflict, as it protects the crop damage, from the herbivores, mainly, from tiger, prey-based species and wild boar. We are collaborating with local communities to erect the mesh wire, in the conflict zones. In the last few years, 5 villages has been fenced and benefiting over 50,000 households. This has been successful to keep out the animals and prevent the crop damage, you see. And another, intervention is the construction of predator-proof corrals. You see, these corrals have been, very successful in protecting the cattle. A significant percentage of, predation happens at unsecured corrals. You imagine, for example, if the predator enters in a corral where livestock are kept, this will kill all in livestock, several animals in one incident. You see, that's why this is important that we have these preventive measures in place. So after the construction of the improved corrals, the loss of cattle has gone zero in ZSL's project intervention sites, and now local communities have been able to save thousands of dollars every year. Over 600 predator, improved predator-proof corrals are supported in partnership with local communities in Tarayark landscape. So, another scheme is that is community banking, that is becoming so popular among the vulnerable communities. This has motivated the communities for the promotion of alternative livelihoods and the ensured the active participation of victim families and indigenous communities in wildlife conservation. So we have over 29 community banks, and all are well operational in Tarayark landscapes, where over 100 households are directly involved in income generation activities. And additionally, we are also supporting communities who are interested in building their ecotourism ventures, and giving them various kind of trainings, including nature guides, hospitality, health and safety, handicrafts, etc. In our working landscapes, ZSL supported 7 homestays, and they all are in operations. Similarly, we also support communities in building water access infrastructure such as conservation ponds, water ponds, tubewell, so that they don't have to travel inside the national park for this basic kind of need. This initiatives, you see, has only this initiative has not only improved the living standard of economically marginalized community, but also reduced the direct dependency of those communities on the forest resources. These are very important initiatives that we have been implementing in our landscapes. Another important thing is building capacity of local communities. That is very important. Enhancing the capacity of local communities through awareness programs are other areas where we are collaborating with the local communities. For example, we are making access of victim families to the government compensation schemes. We have the compensation schemes set up by the governments, but many people, they don't know that. So our job is to make them access towards that kind of provisions, and we provide trainings on community, provide trainings to members, community members on animal behaviors, also providing information about the potential routes of the migrating routes of animals. So these initiatives have considerably, minimized the human wildlife interactions and support in promoting human wildlife coexistence. Other activities we do are we inform the communities, as we think that dissemination of correct information is very important. Therefore, we regularly inform the communities with updated conflict situations in the landscape. We produce conflict maps, and this conflict maps allows us to understand extent of damage caused by the animals, and this information will guide us for site-specific effective implementation of the mitigation activities accordingly. So these are the major interventions that we have been working with communities and other government line agencies towards making community resilient and building coexistence in our working landscapes.
That's a really amazing program. What great work. So you mentioned some conservation outreach work that you've done with engaging communities. From that, is your team hopeful that you can reach a place of human-wildlife coexistence? And have there been any successes from the perspective of your team on the ground?
This is very difficult task, but what we want to see in our landscape, that We want to ensure the continuity of ecosystem services in the shared landscape, so that both the well-being of people and wildlife are secure, and they become resilient, to various impacts from climate change and anthropogenic, changes. This is what we want to see in our landscape, So there are already, good hopes. I would say yes, though it is challenging. If we look back and analyze the conservation history in Nepal, there are some clear indications that we hopefully reach coexistence. In some areas in Nepal, people acceptance has increased due to increasing benefits from protected areas. For example, in Chitwan National Park, the tolerance, of communities has increased due to increasing income from, protected areas. They generate, millions of rupees from tourism. There is a clear, resources sharing mechanism set up by the government of Nepal, in which the 50% of, of the revenues collected by the park that will go to the communities for their well-being. Because of this lucrative initiative, local communities are, actually creating constructive environment for the promotion of wildlife-based tourism ventures in buffer zone. And many other protected areas are now replicating the same. The best, next example is Baghwan National Park, where, wildlife-based tourism is growing, in a new height. So these are the clear evidences, of community willingness to promote coexistence. If we look at the government side, the government is always, investing a huge amount of resources to, to compensate the human wildlife cost, associated costs, human wildlife conflict associated costs every year, and the government is always keen to have that situation, So that's why the government has formulated a number of wildlife and people-friendly rules and regulations, to address their needs. For example, we have compensation mechanism that I have already mentioned. If, if there is a human loss from wildlife, 1 million Nepalese rupees, equivalent to $10,000 will be supported immediately. These are the, wildlife and people-friendly rules, regulations that are implementing, since long in Nepal. So next, the beauty of Nepal's conservation is we have very strong community networks across the buffer zone of protected areas. These networks are institutionalized and they are playing vital role in establishing coexistence. So we all, government, local people, and conservation organizations are on the same board towards building a coexistence for long-term wildlife conservation, as well as well-being of local communities.
Great. And is there anything that you think people could do, maybe people watching this video who aren't necessarily in close proximity to everyday human-wildlife conflicts, but is there something that people could do to support coexistence in the longer term?
Yeah, of course, there are a number of ways that we need the international community support, We actually request them to join hands with us for the promotion of, coexistence. For example, they can support us by not purchasing and using wildlife parts or their derivatives, and encourage the, purchase of wildlife-friendly souvenirs, that communities can support us in that way. Similarly, they can also support for innovative techniques and methods that helps, in mitigating conflicts. And also they can make access our communities, local organizations to different charities. So, that will help us to work in that sector. So we request to learn about, conservation and human conflict scenarios in Nepal and spread, conservation message in their community. And next, they can visit, protected areas to support income of local people. In case of Nepal, I mentioned before that 50% revenues, including from tourism, that will go to the community. If they visit to the protected areas, that means they are supporting, to the community living in the fringe of protected areas. So they can also support to, conservation organizations like ZSL, who that are working, in mitigating and tiger conservation activities. So for example, they can support ZSL work in Nepal by direct donations. The donation will be, will go to directly to the affected communities. There are a number of ways that, they can support our initiatives.
Great, that's really encouraging. Thank you so much, Baghwan, for your time today. It's been so interesting to learn more about your work in Nepal.
Thank you very much, for inviting me for this important discussions.
Great.